Please welcome Jim Hoberman to the stage. Jim, thank you for coming to discuss the film with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Maybe we can start with your telling us how the idea to make the film came about.
Okay. First of all, I should say that I really think that I haven't seen the film in a while. I mean, the film really speaks for itself, I think, very much. So, I mean, I'll be glad to, tell you whatever I can about the conditions under which it came about. First of all, it's kind of obvious, but the whole Polish film industry was destroyed in World War II, along with many other, things. And coincidentally or not, some of the people who had been instrumental in creating a small Yiddish film movement in the late 30s survived the war. All of them by going east. They all survived the war in the Soviet Union. And in another coincidence, because there was no film industry, the nucleus for a post-war industry came from the Red Army, which had a film unit. And Alexander Ford, whose name you may know, he directed Mir Kuminan, which is kind of a precursor to this film, made the first Polish movie, which had to do with Majdanek, it's also the first Holocaust documentary. And so when they got back to Poland, the army kind of spawned Film Polski, and Alexander Ford was the head producer or the chairman or whatever. He was the head of Film Polski, and he got in touch with Shaul Goskind, whose name you may have seen on the credits, who had been his producer in the 30s. Ford was part of a kind of avant-garde movement, documentary filmmakers and so on. Goskind was I would say, although he was in his 20s, the preeminent Yiddish cineast. He had a magazine, he had a lab, he produced movies, did all these things. Ford, am I going on too long? Oh, okay. Ford wanted to make him the head of a film unit, since he was the head of Film Polski. And Goskind declined because he wanted to make Yiddish films. And so he was able to get his own thing going, a collective called Candor, which was funded primarily by the Joint Distribution Committee. And the situation in Poland, in the title they said, well, the communists this, the communists that. I mean, Poland was completely chaotic in the aftermath of World War II for several years. The communist consolidation didn't happen until later. Anyway, Goskind, along with a young guy, Natan, whose name you may also have seen in the credits, who had survived the war in Poland. Very, rare. I mean, that he was able to do that. He was sheltered by a Gentile family, and so he was, when they started things up, there was an ad in the paper for somebody who wanted to learn how to be, be an apprentice filmmaker and so on. So he teamed up with Goskind, and he was a political guy too. He was a Gordonist. Would that be the, So they began making these little newsreels in Yiddish, which Gross had to kind of learn. That wasn't, but he picked it up. And these were really the first films that were produced in Poland after the war, were these little Yiddish newsreels. And there was a certain amount of ambivalence about that. The Poles didn't really want the first movies to be made to be these newsreels, but they continued making them. They showed them in various community centers and so on, largely in the South, in Silesia, which was where Jewish, life was rekindled to some degree after the war. The first Yiddish theaters were there, and so on. And they were ambitious. They made a documentary, which was a kind of feature-length version of these newsreels, which is all about the restoration of Jewish life. You know, monuments, classes, you know, workshops. You know, an attempt to promote a post-war Jewish life in Poland. And then their second film was this one, which they got into, which sort of came out of the newsreels in a way, because it is a real orphanage that they're, you know, Helenovik, which they're filming, and Dzigan and Schumacher, who also survived the war in the Soviet Union, who were tremendously popular. And I would say, maybe if you saw the film yesterday, you saw them. And they made several others. This is really the only film where you get to see why these guys were so popular. You get to see how good they were in various places in this film. Anyway, they had also been touring around, I mean, you know, performing for various groups of Jewish survivors. The Living Remnant, it would be the English, you know, translation of what they were called. And so they were able to finance this film, but then, you know, there was no way of getting it shown in Poland. I mean, the situation just changed very drastically in 1948 after the consolidation, and all of them ended up leaving. The major people involved in this movie all went to Israel, and so did the film, where it had its premiere. So that's, I mean, that's in a nutshell, I think, how it came into existence.
Oh, fascinating. Do you think it was, so it's kind of a hybrid structure, and several plays within or films within the film. Do you know if the structure evolved or if that was kind of baked into their concept from the start?
Well, I think that they had some really interesting ideas about filmmaking when they made this, and also they were dealing with an issue, which, how do you deal with it? And the film is about that. I mean, the film is so ambivalent, but I think in a productive way. You know, I should say, imagine that the first movies about the Holocaust were made in Poland. And, you know, there's Wanda Jakubowski's film about Auschwitz, which actually involved, you know, people who had been inmates and so on. And there was a film in Czechoslovakia, Distant Journey, and so on. So people were trying to deal with this. But their way of dealing with it was unique, I think, because the film, you know, critiques its own representation. And, of course, since they had managed to survive the war, you know, under the Soviets, they only found out what had happened when they made their way back. And you're dealing with the most, you know, like, shell-shocked people. I mean, you know, how are they going to put this together? They had to. How could they comprehend what went on in their absence? And so I think it was kind of necessary for them, but also extremely insightful that they made a movie that criticized itself. I mean, the movie's a kind of psychodrama. Those are real kids. Those are not actors. They're talking about their experiences in the film. The director is not. Nusia Gold. She was an actress who had, I think, managed to survive the war in France. I'm not sure it's in my book. I forget exactly. But the kids are real, you know, orphans who survived the war, talking about their lives, and that gave the film a whole other, you know, meaning. And they were smart to go with it. But you can see how they're trying to work this out themselves in the course of the movie. You know, is a degree. How do Dzigan and Schumacher, and by extension the filmmakers, how can they channel the experience that these children went through, and by extension, you know, the 2 million Polish Jews. And
do you think the children were actually telling their own personal stories?
It's hard to know, but I think that in some sense they were. I think in some sense they were. I mean, which makes it even more, you know, when you see that little girl telling that incredible story that she's the actual girl. I mean, you I think that they were.
And so the cast was largely, apart from Dzigan and Schumacher and the director of the orphanage and maybe the guy with the cart in the beginning.
Yes, the comic relief, that guy.
But non-professional and
no, but they put him in. I mean, I'd forgotten about that. They put him in. There's this little thing. They're really trying to put an optimistic spin on things. I mean, the filmmakers were also very progressive in a general sense. I mean, they wanted to. They were interested in building a new Poland, and that's of course like there's a tragic aspect to that too, because it proved to be virtually impossible. But when they talk about the Jewish, like they gave them the Jewish farmers got land and so on. And that guy, yes, he was some kind of performer. He sings almonds and raisins. I mean, so he had some show business experience, I guess.
And what do you make of what he says about kind of addressing or preempting Dzigan and Schumacher's surprise? They address him in Polish, right? And he answers in Yiddish, saying, yes, Jews are given land.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a way of showing that the Jewish life is returning, which is what their earlier film, Wir leben geblieben, we live again, we're still here. I mean, and I'm sure that some of you recognize that the song that they sing at the beginning and the song that they sing at the end is the partisan song, we're still here. I mean, so I think that that's the part of it. Like I think that you could be a naive viewer, and he says, what am I? No, I'm a Turk. He's being funny, with that. Of course, what else would he be?
And there are kind of two preambles, if I'm not mistaken, before the action, so to speak, starts. There's, at the time of the restoration, I think a text crawl was added explaining about the film, and then the part where you see the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial. Do you know if that was part of the original?
Oh, no, that's part of that's part of the newsreels that they were making. That was something that Natan Gross, he went all over Poland documenting, Jewish events in probably starting in late 46 into 48. I mean, 48 is when they, I think, or 46, 47, he was documenting these various things.
I think it's very telling that the children, the next morning, it's such a positive portrayal of how they've worked through something. Like the night brings terrors and the morning can bring hope.
Well, they want to believe that there is that there is something therapeutic, but of course, you can't. There's no guarantee of that, and there, it's hard to put a positive spin on it. But I think that's what they're trying to do. I mean, they were educated by this, and presumably the audience that saw it, which was, as I should say, exclusively a Jewish audience. I mean, this was not shown. It was not shown at all in Poland, but even the other documentaries, the little films. I mean, they were just shown primarily and maybe exclusively to Jewish groups.
And the adults who also tell their stories, they seem particularly like re-undergoing their trauma by telling the stories. They're very powerful. Yeah. I mean, I assume that the people. I mean, my guess is that the women you see working in the kitchen and so on were actually working in the orphanage, and so they had to survive. I mean, everybody would have a story, who was there, and they told some. I mean, I always wonder about the woman who's like the assistant, because as if she was going. It's almost as if she was going to say something, but you never hear it. So I don't know whether they, cut that out or what, but. And also the sort of ranges of experience that are shown, and the way the sort of nighttime conversation in the kitchen, it's almost like there's a hierarchy or just a comparison between the partisans or people who survived in the forests and those who survived elsewhere.
Yes, definitely. There is that subplot when they talk about, the idea. One of them says the idea that the Jewish children should learn that Jews fought back, and that's certainly part of what it's about. But even that, in the context of it is it can't really, like the film recognizes that it's very hard to deal with the enormity of this. And the fact that this was really the first movie made on the subject, and it realizes that is remarkable, I think, because now, it's sort of crazy to refer to a genre of Holocaust films, but the fact is that there is, and I'm not even talking necessarily about documentaries, of which, you have the great example of Lodzman's Shoah, which is not a consoling movie. I mean, it's incredibly significant, and it's a great film, and it's an amazing piece of historical research, but it doesn't make you feel better. So I think that's, it's part of movies. That's their job, right? To cheer you up. So they have to, figure out some way, to have some consolation at the end. Life goes on. The children can play, and that's. I think that the use of the Sholem Alecheim play is to me fascinating because he is making fun of a catastrophe. He's mocking, these, the shtetl's, inability, to really to function with this, and it's presented as a comedy, and the children take it that way. It's very dark, in a sense.
Yeah, and what was the reception of the film when it finally played?
This is very interesting. The film, so Goskind managed to get 2 prints out. This is in, I think, probably in early 1950, and this is, when really the Jews were just, by this point, streaming out of Poland, the Jews who survived one way or another. And so he sent 1 print to Paris, which turned out to be very fortunate, and 1 print went to Israel, and where it was shown at the Eden Theater in Tel Aviv. And what's really interesting is that there are 2 opposite descriptions of the response to the film. One is that people were weeping and were, it was so powerful for them to see this, and the other was that the film, people didn't like it. So, but the thing is that, of course, there would be these 2 responses in Israel because, the Holocaust was not a secular religion in Israel in 1950. I don't think we can have time to go into, the way that the attitudes that were there, and Yiddish was actively discouraged. So, there were bound to be people, who thought that this was like some kind of, negative, Galus Yid thing, that was being shown there. And on the other hand, people who, there was still, a sizable amount of Polish or East European Jews in Israel. For them it was something else. Dzigan and Schumacher, I know this from people who grew up in Israel in the 50s. Oh, they split up, but they were very, very popular. But their only audience basically was Polish Jews. It's not like they crossed over into a wider, Israeli public for the most part. At least that's how it's been told to me.
So at the time this was made, they were living in Poland, and then
they left. They left before the film was, when the film was in post-production, which I think took some time. And Natan Gross left. Goskind stayed long enough to get the film out of the lab, and then send it by diplomatic power. He was a real. Goskind is an incredible character. And so he was able to figure out some way to get it out to France, and then he probably just like brought the reels with him to Israel.
Well, in some ways, it feels like a miracle that the film managed to get made. It was a really brave and bold undertaking. And then another miracle that we can see it somehow today.
No, I agree. I agree. It really, and it's a tribute to the determination of these filmmakers to make this happen. I mean, when they know that they're like swimming upstream, making this movie. And, I mean, they're being positive, even though all sorts of terrible things happened in the immediate aftermath of the war to Jews who were returning to Poland, and, but they really, they truly wanted to continue Jewish life in Poland. And, that was, I think, then that's what gave them, the strength to do this. And then, it just was impossible. I mean, Alexander Ford, actually, since I mentioned him, made this film Border Street, which, again, another movie which is not nearly as well known as it should be. I mean, he was able to, sort of leveraging his position as the head of Film Polski, make a film about the Warsaw Ghetto, which was a very, that was not a subject that was going to go over well with Polish's audiences necessarily. It had to be made in Czechoslovakia. It was a co-production in Czechoslovakia, and he had a terrible time getting it shown. Although he ultimately did. Stalin took it, took personal offense at this movie. And the thing with Ford is he managed to get it out. It was shown at the Venice Film Festival. He even opened it in New York, but he was no longer the head of Film Polski, although he continued to make films in Poland. So I think that this group of people were really very committed to doing what they did.
Very talented, yes.
Very talented, and I think people who felt that they had a mission.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you so much
Sure.
for discussing.